This video is going to be all about text purposes, which means what is the text trying to achieve. We're going to have a look at a few different purposes you might be asked to write, and then seeing if you can spot the different kinds of purposes looking at actual text. So we're just going to go through some different purposes. First of all, we've got explain. So explaining is to make something really clear, to tell you about something. It can be very specific about the details. It's to help the reader know something. So it's got that one singular purpose. We're just trying to make it clear. They've got no other agenda, is how I would say it. Okay, next we move on to persuade. Now this is a very powerful purpose in that it's making the audience think or feel something, and it tends to use a lot of facts or emotive language and some language techniques to really persuade and influence the audience. So that's to change. So two very different types there. Explain, it kind of has no bias, whereas persuade really wants a person to think in a particular way. Next we've got describe, and this is when you use visual language. We call this imagery, so the audience can imagine it for yourself. So like, describe a time when you were under great stress or something like that. Next one we have is argue. So this expresses one point of view, and this kind of has a little bit more of an aggressive tone, and it's got a one-sided point of view. Okay, well it's kind of like a more aggressive version of persuade. Okay, it's typically used in kind of confrontational text. So like, you could be arguing the usefulness of mobile phones in classrooms, rather than persuade is to try and get someone to physically do something. When you argue, you're just mainly talking about why something is incredibly valid. You're not particularly trying to get them to do something, but just trying to get your point across. So each of these purposes, they have their own kind of, they have a different feel to them. And you'll get more of a sense of that the more you kind of read a few of these. Let's move on to a few more. Okay, so here are a few others, and it's a strange thing about purposes is that sometimes they do overlap. So sometimes you will need to describe something if you want to persuade someone to use it. So if I said you should go on holiday to this beautiful, gorgeous place, I'm going to use some imagery to talk about these beautiful palm trees and beautiful sandy beaches. But then I'm going to also ask you rhetorical questions to persuade you. Say, wouldn't you love to go to this place? Why don't you go to this place? This is an amazing place. Using those powerful words and stuff. So sometimes they do have an overlap. It tends to be that in reading questions I ask you what is the main technique. So sometimes we do have a few. So another difficult thing is sometimes they have different variations that are basically the same. So instruct and explain could possibly be seen as similar, but they have some subtle differences. So when we look at the instruct, this is almost like, setting out a series of instructions. So something that a person could follow step by step. These tend to be kind of used in very simple language because the purpose here isn't to entertain the reader or change their mind. It's to communicate the steps they need to follow in as clear a manner as possible. So that's sometimes why they use those numbered bullet point steps and things like this. One of my favorite ones is discuss. Okay, so discuss. This is one of the ones that's very different to argue. Argue, you're talking about one particular thought, one particular kind of way of thinking, but when you discuss, you're talking about both sides of the argument. So when the writer talks about both sides of the argument and considers them both, so discuss the practicalities of having a mobile phone in a lesson. Okay, so that means if you're discussing, you're talking about positive sides and negative sides, but if you're persuading or you're arguing about a particular point of view, so they might say argue that mobile phones shouldn't be allowed in classrooms, then you're probably not going to spend that much time on anything that would be good about it. You've got to really kind of make your point very, very clear. But so that discuss has that nice balanced feel, and we'll have a look into that a little bit more in a second. Okay, so how to plan for these different purposes. So a really, really difficult thing, especially with the functional skills exams, is that you don't know what exact purpose and what exact content they can actually ask you to refer to. So it's important to know these purposes really well and know how to plan for them. So first of all, we've got the explain one. And my advice would be just to make those make some notes of some of the key important details that the reader will have to know to gain a strong understanding. So if I said something like, explain what a university is to somebody who'd never heard of it, okay, I'm going to get those key points down, that it's a place of higher learning, that it's a place that isn't compulsory education, and that's considered quite high level education, where people pick like a specialism. So that's I had to really think then, what are the main things I would want to talk about, and then go into those details. It's very difficult. So if you do plan, it's important to kind of really only spend about 5 minutes, because you're going to be losing that time in the writing exam as well. But it can actually increase your marks if you really take that time to have a think before you start writing. When we describe, personally, I would write down any kind of keywords or phrases that will help paint a picture for the reader there. Okay, so sorry, I've left out the quote marks. So paint a picture should be in quote marks there, because it's an expression. Okay, you don't literally paint a picture, but when we go back to those things of like the sandy beach, okay, so think about those things that contribute to that image. Okay, so the clear blue sea, soft white sand, palm trees, these kind of key things. But obviously, you're not going to just talk about one element. You can talk about multiple elements. Maybe you'll talk about the atmosphere of the place and things like that. Okay, next, persuade. Persuasion is actually quite easy to plan for. Okay, so you can write down some facts and statistics, and you're allowed to make these up in the functional skills exams. You don't need to have loads of facts and statistics remembered in your head. You could just say 90% of the people who use such and such find it to be useful. Okay, and that could be just an example of a persuasive technique that would persuade someone. And then any kind of persuasive techniques that you can think of that would actually suit that subject, your rhetorical questions, maybe a simile or a metaphor if you can. Okay, next, argue. I'd write down your main points. So I wouldn't do more than 4, okay, and more than 3 or 4, but like argue. So a typical one they use is writing about neighbours who are noisy and disruptive. So I'd just go, we can't sleep at night. One paragraph, we can't sleep at night. Other bullet points, talk about feeling threatened and not feeling comfortable in your own home, and then later on you would then go on to expand upon those. So it depends upon the subject you've been asked to write, but those are some of the techniques I would look for those 4 purposes, but we'll have a look at a few more in a second. Okay, so when we're looking at instruct, instruct is good because you can break it down into key stages that a person would have to follow. And instruct is always kind of what we call in numerical order, certain order or chronological order that you have to kind of do in a certain order. So making a brief note of that might be really good. Discuss. I think discuss is really nice for planning. Okay, you could just do a rough table showing some pros and cons, and maybe a little note at the end to summarize your overall thought. But once again, try not to spend too much time on these because you're already running out of time for the writing exam. Okay, so we're just going to spend a moment to look at an example. So there's been a huge debate about mobile phone use. Discuss the benefits and potential hazards of having a phone. Okay, so if this was an exam, the first thing you would do is you would try and locate the purpose. So I would personally underline or highlight that word discuss there, just so that I know what I'm doing. So discuss the benefits of the mobile phone use. So I know that I've got to have that table, pro and con, and just come up with a few things. But remember, we're only looking for about 250 to 300 words, and you want to be able to go into enough detail, so don't have too many ideas. You can pause the video now if you want and have a go at yourself, and then I'm going to show you an example that I did. Okay, so let's say I did a quick table. I did my pros. So pros, you can look up information at any time. So let's say if that was one of my main points, I'd want to expand upon that. So you can look up information at any time. I'd try and come up with a few examples where that would be useful. Things like, someone has a problem around the house, you can look up DIY problems and things like that. So I'll try and go into detail and give as many relatable experiences as that shows that mobile phone usage is really good. Social life might improve. Okay, so that might mean that family members like your grandmother who might live far away, you've got that increased communication. And then I'll go into the benefits of what's good about having increased communication with a grandmother. How would that make you feel? How would that positively impact your life? So I'll just be expanding upon these as I write. Next, you might want to talk about can make you more productive with apps and access to work emails. So once again, going into those details, what type of things could I use to make myself more productive? Would I get an app that would help me manage my money? Would I get an app that could help me manage my time? These kind of things. Now, you might already see that something I've tried to do is I've tried not to write in full sentences in my actual plan. Okay, because you do really try and do very, very quickly. I will actually say that one flaw of my plan here, I'd say I've probably given myself too many points there. But what you could do is you could put a star next to one, and you could say, look, if I'm running out of things to write about, I'm going to do this little star. But what the exam is actually looking for is detail. So if you bring up one of these things, they want you to kind of expand upon it. Okay, cons, we've got phone addiction. So I just wouldn't just say people won't be able to put down their phones. I could say, phone addiction could lead to people being more distracted at work. Maybe they would stop sleeping. Maybe they would ignore their partner because they're too busy playing on some of the quite cool games that they've got on mobile phones. And then also, expensive could be lost or stolen. So talk about that. How would that feel if you had this really expensive phone and somebody stole it? And then there's been huge cover of this in the news over the past decade or so. So increased social media exposure might have negative effects on mental health. And with things like this, you can always prepare yourself by every now and then just checking on those news websites and getting a few kind of real world examples that you can possibly draw from to flesh out your answers. Okay, because if they're in the news, it's a good real life example that you could use. Then I might write a sentence about my conclusion. So I've put it in purple there, guys, so sorry if it's hard to see. A person has to really consider how they will use it and how they might avoid the negative aspects. Okay, so in that discussion, I'm saying yes, there are good things about mobile phones, but it depends upon that personal usage, and a person must be really, really careful when they think about it. And I think that's quite a nice measured response. Okay, so as long as you address both sides of the argument, then that'll be a good discussion piece. Okay, so on this bit, we're just going to go through some different purposes of text. Okay, there's 6 in total, so if you could just have a go at reading them and then see if you can note down what purpose you think it is. So this one, it's got a numbered list. It says preheat the oven at 180, add 300 grams of flour, whisk an egg and pour into the mixture. So what kind of purpose do you think that might be? Number 2, this phone is innovative, sleek and fun to use. This has revolutionized how we look at mobile phones. The only question is, what are you waiting for? So what purpose do you think it is? Text 3, I don't think we should be going into another lockdown. The simple fact is we haven't been shown any evidence to suggest that another month of staying indoors will help improve. We need facts, data, and a route to improvement. This approach is absolutely ridiculous. Okay, so what purpose do you think that would be? Is it balanced or does it have one point of view? Text 4. Imagine yourself sitting on a warm, sandy beach. The sky is clear in the distance. You can hear the sea moving back and forth with its rhythmic crashes and swells. The water is a clear blue and shimmers in the midday heat. So what do you think that text is trying to do there? Text 5. On the one hand, I think computer games can be very enjoyable and is a good way of keeping children from getting into trouble. On the other hand, too much of anything can be a bad thing. Okay, did that persuade? Did that describe? Did it discuss? or did it inform? Text 6. What is a Help to Buy ISA? A Help to Buy ISA is a high-interest savings account where the government agrees to pay a 25% bonus on any savings to anyone who has a Help to Buy ISA. There is a limit as apart from the first time of opening an account where you can put in up to £1,000, you can only put a maximum of £200 a month so that the bonus never gets too high. So is that trying to persuade you to do something? Is it informing you about something? Or is it giving you a set of instructions for you to follow? Okay, number 1. Now I think the main purpose for that was to instruct. Number 2 was trying to persuade. Number 3, argue. Number 4, describe, because it was trying to paint that picture. Number 5 was discussing, because it had that balanced argument. And then number 6 was to explain. I mean, you might have also written inform, and I think that would be an acceptable answer. Like I said before, some of these purposes, they do kind of overlap a little bit. Finally, some of the pictures that were provided with this were all from Unsplash, and here was just a list of some of the people who created those great images that I was able to use and make my PowerPoint look a little bit more pleasant. Okay, so thanks very much to those people for sharing, and thanks for you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.